chapter 27, please. Matthew chapter 27. We're going to work through Matthew's gospel account. We'll leave it one time, but the rest of our time will be spent in the book of Matthew. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I tell folks back home at Northwest in Beaumont, Sundays are the best day of the week. And I hope you understand why they are the best day of the week. It's the day of the week that we get to come together as the family of God with our brothers and sisters and worship our Heavenly Father. Folks, this is great. This is a great time, and it is the best day of the week. Thank you so much for the invitation to be with you. I don't take these invitations lightly. Appreciate Sean and Bonnie. Bonnie is particularly important to me because my oldest daughter's name is Bonnie. And so we didn't name her after Bonnie, but that was a happy coincidence. I guess that would have been better. I probably should have led with that. Would have endeared myself to you right off the bat. My oldest daughter happens to be named after Bonnie. Is that better? But I appreciate them so much, and I'm looking forward to our time together this week. Matthew 27, verse 35. And they crucified him and divided his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. And sitting down, they kept watch over him there. I don't think it's a shock to people that the resurrection is the greatest doctrine of the Christian faith. It is the resurrection that Paul would say powerfully declared Jesus is the Son of God, Romans 1 and verse 4. It is by the resurrection that we have the powerful attestation of our faith. It is the tomb that's empty that validates the claims of Christ, that clarifies His identity, that gives us powerful witness to the truth of the gospel message. The resurrection, folks, is powerful. But the cross of Christ precedes that tomb. And as comfortable as we are to talk about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, we need to be adequately comfortable to talk about the cross of Christ. And I think that sometimes there's elements of the cross that we are content to talk about. We will sometimes talk about the sayings of Jesus. It's a powerful sermon right there, folks. It's a powerful study through the Gospels to talk about the things that Jesus said from the cross. When you think about all the things that He said in the context of when He said it, that is impressive. But I will tell you, what impresses me just as much is a study through the Gospel accounts, looking at the things He could have said. And what I want you to be impressed by this morning is not the sum total of the things we will discuss. I'm sure you could add a few more things to my list. But what I want you to be most impressed by is the fact that He didn't utter one of them. Because had He uttered one of them, we would not be here this morning. Had He said one of these things, there would be no New Testament Christianity. There would be no powerful resurrection that declares Jesus is the Son of God. There would be no Sunday service where we partake of the Lord's Supper. There would be no song service. There would be no preaching. There would be no reason to assemble this fine day. Had He said one. And that's what I want us to think about in our time of study this morning. The things that Jesus could have said. I want us to begin a little earlier in Matthew's account, back up to chapter 26. There are some elements of this. We will not be able to read the entirety of the account, so there's going to be some things I'm going to have to take for granted. I'm going to assume that you know them, and I'm not going to set the context every time because there's too much to talk about here. So I want to begin in the middle of this thought, Matthew 26, verse 36. The first thing that Jesus could have said, He could have said, "Not today." Let's start here. This is in the Garden of Gethsemane. Matthew 26, verse 36. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." He took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me. And he went a little farther, fell on his face, and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And he came to the disciples, found them asleep, and said to Peter, What? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away again a second time and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done. And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. And he left them, went away again, prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to his disciples and said to them, Sleep on now, take your rest. Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, he who betrays me is at hand. Folks, as uncomfortable as this might make us, this is indeed part of the story of Jesus. I'm sure you sing the song, Tell Me the Story of Jesus. It's beautiful, it's poetic. And that third verse is haunting. Tell of the cross where they nailed him, writhing in anguish and pain. Folks, this is part of the prelude to that. Here Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Matthew stresses the anguish in which he sits. All that's going on, and all that will inevitably go on. I want you to be impressed by the fact that this is Jesus Christ, God incarnate, in flesh. Imagine sitting in that garden, knowing what's coming. In fact, the text really doesn't have to force us to imagine this. The text says this. Look again. He says in verse 37, Matthew records, he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. So much so, Jesus himself says it in the next verse. My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Can you imagine what this would have looked like for Peter, James, and John to watch their Lord, the Lord who calmed the seas, the Lord who was afraid of nothing? And in this moment, he is visibly in pain. Luke's account would remind us that around this time, in these prayers, his sweat becomes as drops of blood. Have you been under that much pressure before? All of the mental anxiety and anguish of what is coming. The soul being so sorrowful, even to death. We're a little loose with that phrase in our culture. My girls are regularly starving to death. But you and I both know what that means. I've been there. There have been times when my stomach thought my throat had been cut. But I've never been starving to death. I've never been so sorrowful, even to death. I've never been in a situation, folks, with all the pressures of my own life, and I've had some, where I have walked a little farther, verse 39, and fell on my face as if you can't take another step. Folks, that's what's happening in Matthew 26. That Jesus is under such pressure in the moment that everything about him is showing it. The sorrow that's almost tangible. I want you to appreciate, folks, that although Jesus had known this was the purpose for which he came, now that it's here, how easy it would have been to back out. For this purpose I came. You ever been out with your parents when you were a little child and were faced with that horrible situation where your mother said she was going to murder you when you got home? And you knew you deserved it. But you tried to get out of it, didn't you? My mama was ruthless. When she said, I'm going to kill you when we get home, she meant it. And there wasn't no bartering to get out of it. There was no pleading, Mama, I'll be better. Mama, I'll be perfect. Mama, I'll never make the mistake again. No. It was something I was getting, and she was going to make sure I understood it. But how quick we are to try to pass the buck, how quick we are to get out of something. Now looking back, we know, I deserved that. I deserved that big time. But folks, I want you to appreciate the anguish that Jesus is in Matthew 26 is not because He deserves it. When Paul presents a big survey of the gospel, in essence, in Romans chapters 1, 2, and 3, he places heavy emphasis on the fact that all people are justly condemned by a holy God. That means, folks, that because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, Romans 3:23, everything he's been talking about building to that powerful crescendo, God has a right to condemn the world. God has a right to send people to hell. As uncomfortable as that makes us, and as repulsive as that is to our society, it is inevitably the truth revealed in Scripture. Folks, what he's facing in Matthew 26 is not because he messed up. It's because humanity rebelled against a holy God. But what if he had said, not today? You know there's a time in the Gospels when he does do that? In fact, this is one of the craziest passages, I think, in the Gospel of Luke. In Luke chapter 4, Jesus, at the beginning of his time as a preacher, he starts in the synagogue and he reads from Isaiah. And as he's done reading the passage, the people lose their minds. They take him out of the city's on a hill, they take him out of the city, they push him to the edge of the cliff, and I love what Luke does with no explanation. The next verse and Jesus walked through the midst of them. And then life went on. He kept on preaching. But you say, wait a minute, Luke, I'm not following. What happened, Luke? Well, folks, in that moment, in Luke chapter 4, he said, not today. He told, they want to kill him, they want to push him off the cliff. He said, no, sorry, too bad, Jack, I'm going down the road. What if in Matthew 26 he had done it then? What if in this moment, now that it's here, he says, not today. You know what, better yet, not any day. But folks, verse 39 reminds us of where he's at. Not only is he so exceedingly sorrowful even to death, not only is he in agonizing pain and misery, in verse 39, he is focused and he is intentional. Look at this. Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. There's the anguish. There's the pain. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. There's the resolve. He wouldn't say, not today. He wouldn't say, not today, because he was focused on what the Father wanted. He was focused on what he was going to do. I tell you, folks, that's a wimpy excuse. And yet, all too often we find it on our lips. You going to go to services today? Not today. You're going to get baptized. You've been needing it. You know it. We know it. Oh, not today. You're going to step up and lead your family? Be the husband that provides spiritually for your household? Oh, not today. Now, sometimes we don't verbalize it, but our actions are screaming it. Why do we find it so easy to throw out some lame excuse when he found it possible to do something so incredibly difficult? Folks, had he said not today, we wouldn't be here today. Thanks be to God he didn't. He could have said, I'm not ready. Picking up in verse 47. While he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now he who was betraying him had given them a sign, saying, whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him. And immediately he went up to Jesus and said, Greetings, Rabbi, and kissed him. And Jesus said to him, Friend, why have you come? Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And suddenly one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword, struck the servant of the high priest, and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, Put your sword in its place. For all those who take the sword will perish by the sword. Or verse 53, Or do you not think that I cannot now pray to my Father, and He will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? How then will the Scriptures be fulfilled, that it must be thus? In that hour Jesus said to the multitudes, Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to take me? I sat daily with you teaching in the temple, and you did not seize me. But all this was done, that the Scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook Him and fled. What if, as the multitude comes out to Him in verse 47, what if He had just simply said, I'm not ready. Don't want to go yet. Well, what do you think would have happened? He wouldn't have went yet. To appreciate this, we need to appreciate who they're talking to in this passage, folks. In fact, just look a little further in the text. Down in verse 50. Friend, why have you come? Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took Him. Now I want you to appreciate something, folks. That is ironic. It's ironic because of who Jesus is. You go and do a little run over in some other gospel accounts, like John 1 perhaps. The Word who was God, the Word who became flesh, John 1:14. That's the same creative force behind the world. That's John 1 verses 1 through 4. That's also Colossians 1 and Hebrews 1. Scripture makes the point pretty clear. Jesus is the creative agency behind this whole creation. So appreciate the irony of that verse. The creatures, the creation, took their hands and put them on the Creator who gave them hands in the first place. With His hands, He fashions the world. With their hands, they grab Him. You think they just overpowered Him? You think that they maybe outmaneuvered Him? Maybe that's what it is, Gethsemane, there may be some trees, and they kind of outflanked Him and outsmarted Him. Come on. This is God in the flesh, folks. They grabbed Him and took Him because He let them. With His hands, He fashions the world. With their hands, they arrest Him in the dark of night in the Garden of Gethsemane. What if He had said, I'm not ready? In fact, Peter even gives Him the chance to do that. That's what's even more impressive in the text, because as we know from the other gospel accounts, this was Peter that did this, that took out his sword and lopped off an ear. What if in that moment Jesus had said, hey, Peter, good job. You're kind of a goofy sometimes, but hey, man, right now, you're on point. And so now I'm just going to kind of back away. I'll heal this fellow's ear, and I'm going to walk off into the sunset. Why doesn't He do that? And in fact, He goes in the opposite direction by taking the servant's ear, picking it up, and healing him. Their hands are grabbed onto Him to arrest Him. His hands are healing people. He's still helping them while they are arresting Him. He's still serving their needs. What if He said, not today? You know what? Better yet, not any day. Look at the text again in verse 53. Or do you think that I cannot now pray to my Father, and He will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? Do you appreciate the scope of that? You go back and read 2 Kings. When the city is surrounded, what does God do? God says, okay, I'll cut you loose one angel. And that one angel slaughters 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night. Jesus here in Matthew 26 says, if I want to summon the armies of heaven, I can do it. You go and read some of the other places. Matthew 13, Jesus says the angels will gather the world up when it's done. Paul would say in 2 Thessalonians 1 that it's the angels, the fiery angels, who will bring out retribution on all those who don't obey the gospel of Jesus Christ. So what's the point? He says, if I want this done, it's done. I want out of this, I can get myself out of this. I can pray to the Father now, I can call on Him now, and I can be delivered. But I want you to appreciate, folks, if Jesus had done that, where would that leave us? Folks, Romans 1, 2, and 3 again, right? That we would be justly condemned by a holy God, separated for an eternity. And that's not what He wanted. He could have ended it like that. Saved Himself the pain, agony, and humiliation. But it would have sentenced us to eternity in hell, separated from Him, separated from the Father. How many times do we say this? I'm not ready. When are you going to be the mother you need to be for your children? The wife your husband needs? I'm not ready yet. When are you going to step up and draw the lines you need to draw when it comes to the way your family spends its time, spends its money, dresses itself? I'm not ready. When are you going to obey the gospel of King Jesus? I'm not ready. Thanks be to God, He didn't say, I'm not ready. He could have said, why should I? Fast forwarding just a little bit in the narrative. He is paraded before the councils, taken before Caiaphas and Annas, taken before Pilate and Herod, and He's humiliated in front of all of them. But we're going to just kind of fast forward through some of that on into chapter 27, back in front of Pilate at this point, verse 22. This is Matthew 27, verse 22. Pilate said to them, what then shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? They all said to him, let Him be crucified. And the governor said, why? What evil has He done? But they cried out all the more, saying, let Him be crucified. When Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising, he took water, washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it. And all the people answered and said, His blood be on us and on our children. Then he released Barabbas to them. But when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole band of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. When they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and a reed in his right hand. They bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! They spat on him. They took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took the robe off of him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to crucify him. And they came out. They found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross, and when they had come to a place called Golgotha, that is to say, the place of a skull, they gave him sour wine mingled with gall to drink, and when he had tasted it, he would not drink. What if he had said, why should I? What if in the moment, now that it's here, he can still stop it? He says, why should I? But I want you to appreciate, not only was this about the Father, which has been emphasized in this text. I'm here to do the Father's will. It's not my will, but the Father's will. He's really focused on that. It wasn't just what this would do with the Father. Old Testaments, please. Isaiah 53. Isaiah the 53rd chapter. Isaiah 53. It's marvelous to appreciate the depths and the scope of this sacrifice, that Jesus died for the saved. Jesus died to secure the cross, or to secure the church, and I appreciate all of that. But I don't want us to fail to appreciate that this has very personal implications. In Isaiah the 53rd chapter, just appreciate, folks, this is what is said of him 700 years or so before him in the flesh. Who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief.
and we hid, as it were, our faces from Him. He was despised, and we did not esteem Him. Twice now in the verse. He was despised. Verse 4. Notice this next few verses, the plurals. But I want you to personalize this. Surely He has borne our griefs. It's not just our griefs, folks. Surely He has borne my griefs. And He carried our sorrows, my sorrows. Yet we esteemed Him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions, was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon Him, and by His stripes we are healed. Let's think about that, folks. It's not just generically that God died for us, that Jesus Christ suffered such things for us. That's true. It's personal. He bore my griefs, my sorrow. He was wounded for my transgressions. It's for my peace. It's my stripes that He took. Folks, it is because I went astray that Jesus suffered and died that day. But continuing on, verse 6. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on Him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and He was afflicted, yet He opened not His mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent. So He opened not His mouth. Not once did He try to defend Himself. You go read Matthew's account. He spoke, but it wasn't in defense. It was not in protest. In verse 8, He was taken from prison and from judgment. Who will declare His generation? For He was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people He was stricken. And they made His grave with the wicked, but with the rich at His death, because He had done no violence, nor was any deceit in His mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise Him. He has put Him to grief. When you make His soul an offering for sin, He shall see His seed. He shall prolong His days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in His hand. He shall see the labor of His soul and be satisfied. By His knowledge, my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquity. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death. He was numbered with the transgressors. He bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. Did you catch it? He shall justify many. We don't use justify very often, but it is a very biblical concept. It's in Romans. That God, through Jesus Christ, will pronounce innocent, forgive. But listen to that then. Not only is He doing this because of the Father's will, He's doing this because through His actions, through faithful discipleship of the King who's dying in Matthew 27, we can be called innocent before God, forgiven. That's what He wanted. In this entire awful ordeal, folks, He's suffering here so that we can be forgiven. This is God in the flesh. I want you to appreciate what that would really mean as you're thinking through this. This is God in the flesh. What would it have been like the morning of Gethsemane as He's getting dressed for the day, knowing what is to come? Remember something, folks. God in the flesh, omniscient. He knows all things perfectly. If you're thinking about what's going to happen to Him, He knows it's coming. This is stressed especially in John's Gospel account. Think about chapter 1 when Nathanael comes to Him. Jesus says, "Behold, an Israelite in whom there's no guile." Nathanael says, "Wait a minute. How do you know who I am?" He says, "I saw you." Don't you appreciate that Jesus, being God in the flesh, could have perfectly known every member of the mob that comes to arrest Him? He knows Nathanael. He could tell you about each and every member of that mob. Jesus was called the son of the carpenter. It means He would have worked with Joseph. I wonder how many times He picked up one of those nails and thought, one day, that's going to pierce my skin. One just like it. Omniscient God, folks. as He's going about the day in Gethsemane. As the mob comes out to Him. Folks, this is not a question in His mind. Well, I think it could go bad today. He's not wondering what's going to happen. He knows what's going to happen. Jesus could tell you how many times the stripes will hit His back when they scourge Him. We just read that. Jesus could tell you the names of the men who would scourge Him. Jesus could tell you from which wound He would bleed the most. God in the flesh, folks. When they parade Him through the city, He knows which route they'll take. He knows which women will cry. He knows Simon the Cyrene. And He knows at what point they'll employ Simon the Cyrene to carry the cross for Him. Wonder how a 30-year-old carpenter didn't have the strength or stamina to carry a crossbeam. Folks, it's because he was so beaten up at this point, so bloodied, so weakened. As they drag Him out to Golgotha's hill, do you appreciate, folks, at any point in this horrific process, He could have stopped it, called it quits, just simply said, why should I? Simply said, I'm not ready. Simply said, not today, and it would have stopped. And all through the humiliation, being executed under the Roman government was not a pretty ordeal, folks. And all of that, He faces the violence and the vitriol, the pain, the suffering. At any point, He could stop it. And even as they cart Him out to Golgotha and they lay the beam on the ground, He can stop it. Even through the process, as they typically would lay out the horizontal beam and nail the hands to it, and they would secure that to the vertical post and then stick it upright. Through the whole process, He could stop it. Now, I want you to visualize what that would have looked like to have the power to stop the pain, but choosing not to stop the pain. As they take this bloodied man and lay Him across the beam, his back's numb, he's bleeding everywhere. The soldiers, professionals at this, they take His hands and they stretch it out to the edge of that crossbeam. He can stop it. That soldier holds the nail, and the guy raises the hammer. Can you imagine choosing to not stop that? Between every blow of the hammer, the second he's had enough, He says, that's it, and it stops. They're going to do the same thing to His other hand, folks. And they'll take and run generally right through those bones in His wrist. And He sits there and takes it again. And the custom was that they would take a little peg and put it under His feet. And they would cross over their feet and one nail right through the ankle. And that peg was there so that He could lift Himself up and breathe. And then He would relax back down, slump over. Through the process of driving the nail in His feet, between every blow of the hammer, He could stop it. Can you imagine having the power to stop something so horrific and choosing not to? Folks, that's what we're looking at in Matthew 27. As they drag Him out to crucify Him, when He does open His mouth, it's not even in vitriol itself. It's saying, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Wait a minute. Not only is He not saving Himself, not only is He not defending Himself, not only is He saying, wait a minute, guys, you got it all wrong, He's taking the abuse. And in the process of the abuse, still trying to reach out to humanity. This is why Peter says in Acts 2, this Jesus whom you crucified, He's doing it for the very ones driving the nails. He's doing it for the ones who mocked Him and ridiculed Him. Why should I? You say that? Why should I let that brother have his way? Why should I attend? Why should I be faithful? Why should I give deference to this brother? Why should I be patient with them? Why be loving and sacrificial? Why give him everything? Because here's the King giving you everything. And then finally, he could have said, I will. Picking up in verse 35, please. Matthew 27:35. And they crucified him and divided his garments, casting lots that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. And sitting down, they kept watch over him there. And they put up over his head the accusation written against him, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right, another on the left. And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, you who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. Likewise, the chief priests also, mocking with the scribes and elders, said, he saved others, himself he cannot save. If he is the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God. Even the robbers who were crucified with him reviled him with the same thing. What if he had taken up their challenge? You know, you think through this, you think, man, that crucifixion stuff would be horrible, the scourging, the trials. Can't imagine all that. But you kind of maybe think, well, maybe I'll get some relief once I'm crucified. Once I'm up on the cross, they won't be beating me anymore. They won't be mocking me anymore. It'll just be the pain. I can handle that. But that's not what happens. The abuse continues. Oh, look at him on the cross. He said he's somebody. He said he's the Son of God. Well, you know, look here, fella. If you are who you say you are, why don't you just come down? Do you appreciate that after all that he's faced, all that he's suffered, he could have just simply said, well, I will. I'm done with this. Wrap it up. He could have said, I will condemn the world in its lost condition. All the violence, all the blasphemy, all the mocking, all the humiliation. And it stops. Where would that have left us? Lost in our sins, justly condemned by a holy God, separated for an eternity, folks. And that's not what he wanted. That's not what he wanted at all. What he was doing here in this text is addressing the problem of sin. We get a graphic representation of sin in Matthew 26 and 27. This is what it looks like, folks. This is what it costs. When John 14:6 says He's the way, the truth, and the life, this is what He's doing. He's providing the way, He's revealing the truth, and He's granting life. He's giving it to us right here. He's securing it, paving a way. He doesn't say, I will come down from the cross. What He says is, I will finish this. I will go through it. I will see it to the end. He did this for you. Don't just look at the cross and say, wow, that's pretty bad. You got to look at the cross, standing at the foot of the cross. You've got to look at the cross, as the one driving the nails. It is personal, it is graphic, it is terrible to think about. I'm sure you sing this song. I hate this song. I'm sure that in some ways you can sympathize. It's powerful and it's sobering. I was not in the garden when he knelt to God and prayed. I did not kiss him on the cheek when Jesus was betrayed. I could not do a single thing to hurt God's only Son. But every time I sin on earth, I feel that I'm the one. I was not at the trial when the crowd jeered at his name. I did not make him bear a cross or walk a road of shame. I could not do a single thing to hurt God's only Son. But every time I sin on earth, I feel that I'm the one. I was not on the hillside when he gave his life that day. I did not nail his precious hands or take his robe away. I could not do a single thing to hurt God's only Son. But every time I sin on earth, I feel that I'm the one. I'm the one who shouted, "Crucify." I'm the one who made his cross so high. I'm the one who stood and watched him die. What have I done? I'm the one. May we rejoice in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And may we take confidence in our faith because the tomb is empty and he is powerfully declared the Son of God. Amen to that, 10 over. But may we come to terms with the cross. And may we see our King, Jesus Christ, who died there for us. It may be that you've not considered the cross as carefully as you should have, and you have been convicted by some of the things we've discussed this morning. You need King Jesus, and we want to help you. Maybe you haven't, and in the past, and now have drifted back into this world. Consider what he paid. He wants you. Whatever your need is this morning, we'd invite you to make it known now as we stand and as we sing.